So, welcome to the One Hope of Original Christianity, Chapter 2, Session 4, The Coming Kingdom. Wow, this has been a great ride so far, and now we're going to go even deeper. We're in the midst of portraying the Old Testament believers' expectations for the hope. There is a lot here, so we really would be remiss if we didn't cover the hope themes built in the Old Testament. These are the scriptures that formed the basis of the doctrine that the apostles believed on day one of the church age. You see, if we fully understand this foundation, we will then be able to separate truth from error when we examine the truths that were added in the church age. This is especially so with the subject of the kingdom. Of course, there was much more oral tradition from what was spoken by the prophets than written, but all we have to go on today is what's written. The written scriptures follow the development of the Christ line throughout history. Each book of the Bible featured facets of the coming Messiah. But why were Abraham and the Jews chosen to be the Christ line and God's people? Obviously, God knew something about them in his foreknowledge, and there's a clue about this in Genesis. Genesis 18, verse 17. And the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham the thing which I do? Seeing that Abraham surely shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord, to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him." So Abraham apparently was a great family man. He had great character and integrity, and had the ability to impose his will upon his progeny better than anyone else at that time. I think that's why the Jews were chosen. The ability to keep their progeny pure for as long as possible. But they also, once chosen, became a focal point of Satan's attacks. As the Christ line followed Abraham's progeny through Isaac, Jacob, Judah, etc., the scriptures followed suit. For example, the reason that the book of Ruth was written is that she and Boaz are in the Christ line. Ruth chapter 4, verse 17, after Boaz took Ruth and married her, they had a son, and the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, "There's a son born to Naomi." They called his name Obed. He's the father of Jesse, the father of David. So Ruth is in the Christ line. Isn't that fascinating? The books of Samuel cover the establishment of the kingdom under Saul and then David, and through whom the Christ line would then arise. Samuel's books also record the end of the era of the tabernacle, while Kings records the era of the temple. The books of Chronicles record the same from a heavenly viewpoint, plus many details regarding the preparations for the temple. 1 Samuel also covers Samuel's time as a judge and Saul and David's reigns. And in 1 Samuel 8, we get the first ideas about a kingdom. Came to pass, Samuel chapter 8, verse 1, "It came to pass when Samuel was old, he made his sons judges over Israel." Verse 3, "And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said to him, Behold, you're old, and your sons walk not in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all nations." But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Hearken to the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected you, but they've rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they've forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Now therefore hearken unto their voice. Howbeit, yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them." And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked him of a king. And he said, "This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint him captains over thousands, and captains over 50, and will set them to ear his ground, to reap his harvest, to make his instruments of war, and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. And he'll take your fields, and your vineyards, and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. He will take the 10th of your seed and your vineyards, and give to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your men servants and your maid servants, and your goodliest young men, and your asses, and put them to his work. He'll take the 10th of your sheep, and you shall be his servants. And you will cry out in that day because of your king, which you shall have chosen you, and the Lord will not hear you in that day." Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, "Nay, but we want a king over us, that we may also be like all the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles." So Samuel made them a king. As he warned, though, the potential for regal abuse was difficult to resist. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Saul succumbed and was rejected as king. David also stumbled with the Bathsheba incident, but he repented, so his kingdom survived. But the rest of 2 Samuel covered the palace intrigues that resulted from David's indiscretion. 1 Chronicles records David's reign after he repented and includes the prophecy given David by Nathan, in which God promised by a covenant that his kingdom would be established forever. So this is the first prophecy about the kingdom itself. And it also implied that the promise of the Messiah would be through David. So now we are about to embark on an inspection of prophecy about the kingdom of heaven, a subject about which the entire realm of eschatology turns. But I'm going to take you through it from a different perspective. We all see through the same glass darkly, but some more than others. Sometimes we only see outlines. Sometimes, by the grace of God, we see vivid content. You see, most of us are the carriers of prophecy, neither the recipients of the events or the subjects of it. We are in the middle between prediction and fulfillment. When stuff happens, we see if what was shaped by reality fits the outlines that have been predicted. But in the end, when the predictions are fulfilled, the people then are not in control. They merely witness the events, and if they have access to the prophecy, they may understand the significance of what just happened. We, in between, can only anticipate it. Those who received it are not in control either. They only can put themselves in the right frame of mind to receive it and transmit it. Another feature of prophecy is that it is not random. The events, when fulfilled, are important. That is why it was celebrated by the spiritual firework of being prophecy fulfillment. Since God's word profits immediately and ultimately, therefore, prophecy not only finishes something, it also sets things in motion. But the subject and the detail, the method or the character of the communication, and the time of fulfillment and its effects are up to God. Kings and Chronicles are composite books of prophets, some named, many unnamed. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel received a lot and wrote books, others less. But they all were obedient to speak and write. So into this realm we shall go. In 1 Chronicles 17 is another prophecy about the kingdom. Verse 11, 1 Chronicles 17:11. It shall come to pass when thy days be expired, that thou must go to be with thy fathers, and I will raise up thy seed after thee, which shall be of thy sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build me a house, talking about the temple, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. And I will not take my mercy away from him, as I took it from him that was before thee, before David was Saul. But I will settle him in mine house, and in my kingdom forever, and his throne shall be established forevermore. According to all these words, and according to all this vision, so did Nathan the prophet speak unto David. So the second prophecy about the kingdom was spoken by Nathan, and then ultimately it was written in Chronicles. In this original prophecy, the key word is forever. Over time, more prophecy regarding the kingdom was layered on top of this. I'm going to show you that development of that prophecy over time. And since this is a controversial subject, we will need to dot our I's and cross our T's. I'll also fill in more detail from my Old Testament history and chronology class that I have not taught you that material yet, because otherwise some people might get missed here. So I want to make sure you bring you all along with me. Here are some prophecies from Psalms about the kingdom. Psalm 78:70. Psalm 78, verse 70. He chose David, also his servant, took him from the sheepfolds, from following the ewes great with young. He brought him to feed Jacob and his people, and Israel his inheritance. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. David was a model monarch. Psalm 89:1. I will sing of the mercy of the Lord forever. With my mouth will I make known thy faithfulness to all generations. For I have said, mercy shall be built up forever. Thy faithfulness shalt thou establish in the very heavens. I, God, have made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn unto David, my servant, thy seed will I establish forever, and build up thy throne to all generations. Selah. Psalm 89 verse 20 goes on to say, I have found David my servant, with my holy oil have I anointed him, with whom my hand shall be established, my arm shall also strengthen him. The enemy shall not exact upon him, nor the son of wickedness afflict him. And I will beat down his foes before his face, and plague them that hate him. But my faithfulness, my mercy, shall be with him, and in my name shall his horn be exalted. I will set his hand also in the sea, and his right hand in the rivers. He shall cry unto me, Thou art my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. And I also will make him my firstborn, higher than kings of the earth. My mercy will I keep for him forevermore, and my covenant shall stand fast with him. His seed also will I make to endure forever, and his throne as the days of heaven. If his children forsake my law, and walk not in my judgments, if they break my statutes, and keep not my commandments, then I will visit their transgression with the rod, and their iniquity with stripes. This is new information, new conditions. Nevertheless, my loving kindness will I not utterly take from him, nor suffer my faithfulness to fail. My covenant, his promise with David regarding his throne, will I not break, nor alter the thing that has gone out of my lips. Once I have sworn by my holiness that I will not lie unto David, his seed shall endure forever, and his throne as the sun before me. It shall be established forever as the moon and as the faithful witness in heaven. Selah. So with Psalm 89 in the latter part, we see a condition added to the original prophecy. Isn't that interesting? Whether his seed obeys or not. Psalm 132, another prophecy, verse 11. The Lord has sworn in truth unto David, he will not turn from it. Of the fruit of thy body will I set upon thy throne. If thy children will keep my covenant and my testimony that I shall teach them, their children shall also sit upon thy throne forevermore. For the Lord hath chosen Zion, he hath desired it for his habitation. This is my rest forever. Here will I dwell, for I have desired it. I will abundantly bless her provision. I will satisfy her poor with bread. I will clothe her priests with salvation, and her saints shall shout aloud for joy. There I will make the horn of David to bud. I have ordained a lamp for mine anointed. His enemies will I clothe with shame, but upon himself shall his crown flourish. So that was the covenant God made with David. If his progeny kept the word, they would prosper. If not, there would be consequences. But regardless, there would not fail one of David's progeny from the throne. The book of 1 Kings begins with the reign of Solomon and his construction and dedication and provision of the temple. Most believers have the impression that Solomon reigned righteously. However, 2 Chronicles reports that after his 20th year, things began to sour. Solomon made alliances with the surrounding kingdoms, and as part of that, married their daughters of the kings and built palaces and temples for them, because the alliance was measured by how well you took care of the hostages, or in this case, the wives. So he built for them houses and temples that cost a lot of shekels. He got many wives and concubines, and they turned his heart away from the true God. He also imported apes and peacocks, which implies the pagan wares from Africa and Asia, along with much gold, silver, and brass. Chronicles reports that Solomon brought in 666 talents of gold per year. Interesting number. He definitely violated what Deuteronomy commanded regarding future kings. In Deuteronomy 17 verse 14, it says, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are about me. Thou shalt in any wise set him a king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. From one of your brethren shalt thou set a king over thee. You may not set a stranger over you, which is not your brother. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses, forasmuch as the Lord hath said to you, you shall henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. And it shall be, when he sits upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law. So the king would write it in a book out of that which is before the priests and the Levites, and it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to reverence the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes, to do them, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, and that he turn not aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of the land. Wow. Well, Solomon violated that in almost every way. So that condition that was in that prophecy about the kingdom went into effect. 1 Kings 11:1 says, King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not go in unto them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after other gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. Well, that's more than one a day. That's crazy. And his wives turned away his heart. Wow. For it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods. His heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and not went fully after the Lord, as David his father. Then did Solomon build him a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burnt incense and sacrifice unto their gods. Wow. Verse 9, the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he kept not that which the Lord commanded. Wherefore the Lord said to Solomon, forasmuch as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and give it to thy servant. Notwithstanding, in thy days I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of your son. Howbeit I will not rend away all the kingdom, but will give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen. So, in verse 14 and following, it talks about the adversaries that the Lord stirred up against Solomon. And one of them was Jeroboam. And in verse 29, chapter 11, verse 29, we continue. It came to pass at that time when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, that the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, found him in the way, and he had clad himself with a new garment, and they two were alone in the field. And Ahijah caught the new garment that was on him and tore it up into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, take 10 pieces, for thus saith the Lord, God of Israel, behold, I will rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and I will give 10 tribes to you, but he will keep one tribe for my servants. Let's see, verse 37. And I will take thee, and thou shalt reign according to all that thy soul desires, and shall be king over Israel. And it shall be if you will hearken unto all that I command you, and will walk in my ways, and do that which is right in my sight, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant said, then I will be with you, and will build you a sure house, as I built for David, and I will give Israel unto you. So, because of Solomon's disobedience, this is what happened. The kingdom would be torn in two, and there would be a rival kingdom. So after Solomon died, then in chapter 12, 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 3, the people there sent and called Jeroboam. All the congregation of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, who was Solomon's son, saying, your father, Rehoboam, in other words, talking about Solomon, made our yoke grievous. Well, he had all those building projects. Not only the temple, but his palace, or palaces, and then all those houses and temples for all his wives. And so they said, now therefore make thou the grievous service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee. See, Solomon's reign was so onerous that when he died, the people confronted his son, Rehoboam, and they demanded that he lessen their tax burden. In 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 20, it talks about some of the things that Solomon had done. 1 Kings 9:20. And all the people that were left of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, which were not of the children of Israel. So these were people in Judah and Israel during the reign of Solomon that were foreigners. Their children that were left after them in the land, whom the children of Israel also were not able to utterly destroy. Upon those did Solomon levy a tribute of bond service. The Hebrew word is mas obed, forced labor, unto this day. But of the children of Israel did Solomon make no bondmen, but they were men of war, and his servants, and his princes, and his captains, and rulers of his chariots, and his horsemen. These foreigners were enslaved and forced to work in the quarries and the copper mines until they died. This was abuse of the worst kind, and that cannot go without consequence. So, what Rehoboam then said to the people who had told him, please lessen our burden, in verse 5 of 1 Kings 12, he said to them, depart for 3 days, then come back, and I'll tell you what we're going to do. And the king Rehoboam consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived. And he said, how do you advise that I should answer this people? And they said to him, if you will be a servant unto this people this day, and will serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. But he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, which stood before him. And he said to them, what counsel give you, that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, make the yoke which thy father did put on us lighter? And the young men that were grown up with him spoke to him, saying, thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto you. Thy father made our yoke heavy, but make it thou lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say to them, my little you-know-what shall be thicker than my father's loins. Woo! And now whereas my father did lade you with heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father has chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. Wow. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, and the king answered them roughly. He spoke the counsel of the young men. And so, verse 16, when all Israel saw the king hearken not to them, the people answered the king, saying, what portion do we have in David? And they departed. So that is when the kingdom split in two, and Jeroboam became the king of the northern 10 tribes, and Rehoboam remained the king in Jerusalem. Wow. Now, but Jeroboam set a precedent for the northern kingdom that caused it and every king after him to do evil in the sight of the Lord. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 26. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam king of Judah. And they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah. Whereupon the king took counsel, and made 2 calves of gold, and said to them, it's too much for you to go all the way down to Jerusalem. Behold your gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other put he in Dan. So one's at the southern end of the kingdom, and one's at the northern end. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. And he made a house of high places, and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi, because no one else would take the job. And Jeroboam ordained the feast on the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, like unto the feast that's in Judah, on the 7th month. And he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made. See, Jeroboam wanted to make a clean break from the southern kingdom. He feared that if the believers who lived in the kingdom maintained ties with the temple, that ultimately they would return their allegiance to the southern kingdom and get rid of him. So that's why he set up an alternate, counterfeit religion with altars in the northern and southern ends of his kingdom, so that the believers would stay in his kingdom and not go down south. He also went so far as to change the calendar and the timekeeping methods. The civil legal year had been a Tishri to Tishri year, counted by the accession system, where the first year of the king until the next New Year's Day is not counted as a regnal year. Then he instituted a Nisan to Nisan year, and that was counted by the non-accession system, where the first portion of the year of a king's reign unto the next first of the year was counted as his first year. So their years of reign were artificially inflated. This fact about the 2 different calendars and counting systems was discovered by Edwin R. Thiele, Thiele, in his book, The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings. That's a great book because he utilizes the principles of the Bible interpreting itself to solve the problem. The problem was that if you try to work all the dates given in Kings and Chronicles about the reigns of the kings, such and such a king began such and such a year of the opposite kingdom, and he reigned so many years. If you try to diagram those, it falls apart because they don't count the way that we expect them to count. And nobody figured it out until Edwin R. Thiele saw that they were using different calendar systems. That shows the extent of the cultural change that Jeroboam had attempted in order to retain control. This did not sit well with God. Look at 1 Kings 12. So he offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, and he burnt incense. And in chapter 13, verse 1, behold, there came a man of God out of Judah by the word of the Lord to Bethel. And here's Jeroboam, as he's standing by the altar to burn incense. And this prophet in verse 2 cried against the altar in the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name, and upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burned upon thee. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, this is the sign which the Lord hath spoken. Behold, the altar shall be rent, and the ashes that are upon it shall be poured out. The altar was brand new. You know, they hadn't broken it in. And when they burnt stuff on it, they hadn't annealed the brass properly. the altar broke. Wow. And this prophet predicted that king would burn the priests on it. That's 300 years in the future, and he gave the guy's name. Wow. But the fireworks weren't over yet. It came to pass when King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God who had cried against the altar in Bethel, that he put forth his hand from the altar and said, lay hold on him. And his hand, which he had put forth against him, dried up, so he couldn't pull it in again. Wow. The altar also was rent, and the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the sign which the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. And look at chapter 13, verse 6. And the king answered and said to the man of God, entreat now the face of the Lord thy God, and pray for me, that my hand may be restored to me again. And the man of God besought the Lord, and the king's hand was restored him again, and became as it was before. Wow. Can you imagine if you got that command? Could you do that? You know, from what we learned in the last session, session 3, he had to apply what we learned, right? But even after this very public miracle and prophecy, Jeroboam did not relent. He maintained the counterfeit religion, which became known as the sin of Jeroboam. It affected the northern kingdom to the point from then on, only one king, Jehu, of the northern kingdom, did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. And despite the warnings from prophet after prophet, including Elijah and Elisha, the northern kingdom became darker and darker until ultimately it was wiped out by the Assyrians, and its people scattered throughout Mesopotamia and became known as the lost 10 tribes of Israel. I'm giving you a background of the history so you can understand how the prophecies regarding the kingdom developed. Because before there was a kingdom and before there was David, they didn't prophesy about a kingdom, right? But after David and Solomon, and Rehoboam and Jeroboam reigned, then there was content for the prophets to speak about, okay? And so they spoke a lot of things that are not written down about the guidance to the kingdom, etc. Well, now the southern kingdom did not fare much better. Out of the 20 or so kings that were in the next 4 centuries till it was conquered by Babylon, only a portion of them did right in the sight of the Lord. In the cases that the kings did so, often there were revivals. Otherwise, Judaism kept slipping further into corruption. For the next 400 years, the schools of the prophets and sporadically the kings or priests in Jerusalem were the centers from which God dealt with his people. During and after Ahab's reign in the northern kingdom, he sent Elijah and Elisha. Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Micah, and Jeremiah were sent to the southern kingdom. Ezekiel prophesied during the 70-year captivity after the temple was destroyed, and Daniel prophesied in Babylon and Persia when the second temple was built. Now, I'm going to give you guys a chart of the prophets during this period. It'll be available in Way Beyond, and I'll give some more of the handouts from my Old Testament history class that gives the timeline of the prophets. But I'll just go through this briefly. In 870 BC, Elijah was the prophet during Ahab in northern Israel. In 853 BC and on, Elisha was the prophet during the reigns of Ahab through Jehoram. In 767 BC, Amos was a prophet during the reign of Uzziah, who was the king down south in Jerusalem. After Amos came Hosea. He carried on until Hezekiah was king. Then Isaiah after that, during the same period. And then after Isaiah came Micah, and he was during the same period. In 640 BC, Jeremiah was the prophet, and he ministered to Judea when Josiah through Zedekiah were kings. In 586, Jerusalem went into captivity, and that's when Lamentations was written. 598 BC, during captivity, is when Ezekiel ministered to the people who were in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was king of Babylon during that time. After Ezekiel in 609 BC, and these dates are rough approximations, but they're, maybe 5 years in either direction, possibly. Daniel ministered in captivity from Nebuchadnezzar all the way through the Persian king Cambyses. In 538 BC, when the book of Ezra was written, that's when they returned from captivity, and Cyrus was the king in Persia. 501 BC is Nehemiah. He also ministered to the saints back in Jerusalem when they had come back, and this was during the reign of Darius the First. 510 BC, Haggai and Zechariah encouraged the saints to get building the second temple. Again, they'd laid the foundation and gotten scared off. The Samaritans had entered into some intrigue to get them to stop. So that's during the reign of Darius the First. 450 BC is the book of Malachi, and then there aren't any written prophets until the New Testament. 167 BC is the period of time of the Maccabees' reign, and I'm only putting that in because the book of Maccabees is good for historical purposes. It's not a genuine book of the Bible because it does have doctrine in it that contradicts, but it's good for historical purpose. And I'll give you this list as well as some documents, some PDFs from my Old Testament history class. One by one, these prophets gave more specifics regarding the future of the kingdom, including the doom of the northern 10 tribes, the threats against the southern kingdom. The encroachments of paganism were constant, and their digression was interrupted occasionally in Judah by the kings who did good in the sight of the Lord. For example, here's in 2 Kings, this is a classic synopsis of a king's reign. It goes through this formula over and over again for the different kings. 2 Kings 8. And in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, being then king of Judah. Have you heard of jumping Jehoshaphat? This is he. Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. 32 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and did as the house of Ahab, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Yet the Lord would not destroy Judah for David, his servant's sake, as he promised to give him always a light and to his children. So you see, this was the condition. The covenant said, your throne's going to last, but if your children screw up, then they'll have to suffer consequences. Things got so bad that the temple was closed down. When Hezekiah began to reign, it says he caused the temple to be cleansed and reopened. Then the Passover was observed, but they didn't find out about observing the Passover until it was too late. So they actually observed the Passover in the 2nd month. Isn't that amazing? In other words, the Passover had not been observed for a while. Meanwhile, the northern 10 tribes fell further into paganism, and consequently Amos, the prophet, predicted that they and many other neighboring kingdoms would be annihilated by Assyria. The book of Amos records many dire prophecies because of this corruption, but it ends with some hope. Amos chapter 9, verse 13. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that the plowman shall overtake the reaper. In other words, there's going to be so much crops that they'll be harvesting and harvesting and harvesting all the way through until it's time to plant again. The treader of grapes, him that sows seed, and the mountains shall drop sweet wine, and all the hills shall melt. And I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel, and they shall build the waste cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof. They shall also make gardens and eat the fruit of them. And I will plant them upon their land, and they shall no more be pulled up out of their land which I have given them, saith the Lord. Now, such words as this were confirmed by Hosea, who predicted more detailed information about the fate of Israel than Isaiah, who was the son of the prophet Amos, predicted all that would be left would be a remnant. Now, during this time, the kings of Judah were Amaziah, Uzziah, and Jotham, who all did right in the sight of the Lord. And during that time, Judah prospered. But then Jotham's son, Ahaz, broke the string by digressing into paganism, and so Judah was attacked by Syria and Assyria. Ahaz even plundered the temple to pay off the king of Assyria, so that's what closed the doors of the temple. But that didn't stop God, because Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah made up a team of prophets that would not relent. They helped pull off the fact that Judah was saved from the brink of disaster. And when Hezekiah became king, revival started. Because the people had obeyed the word, Hezekiah and Isaiah were later able to defeat the war machine of Assyria, and Judah was spared. The first half of the book of Isaiah builds to that high point. That first half confronts a lot of error, predicting dire consequences, but throughout the first half, there also were details revealed about a future kingdom. So now, information about the kingdom of heaven is starting to come out. And this is where it's really starting to get a lot of detail. Isaiah is the prophet. Isaiah chapter 1 talks about, how he became a prophet and how God called him. And verse 21, how is the faithful city become an harlot? It was full of judgment. Righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. Thy silver is become as dross, thy wine mixed with water. Thy princes are rebellious and companions of thieves. Everyone loves gifts and follows after rewards. They judge not the fatherless, neither doth the cause of the widow come unto them. Therefore saith the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, I will ease me of mine adversaries, and amend me of mine enemies, and I will turn my hand upon thee, and purely purge away thy dross, and take away all thy tin. And I will restore thy judges as at the first, and thy counselors as at the beginning. Afterwards thou shalt be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. Zion shall be redeemed with judgment, and her converts with righteousness. Well, when's that going to happen? Did that happen during Ezra and Nehemiah? No. When's that going to happen? It's still future. Did that happen during the time that Jesus came? No. It's going to be still future. So here, this prophecy is about the millennial kingdom. Okay? Verse 28, and the destruction of the transgressors and of the sinners shall be together, and they that forsake the Lord shall be consumed. Well, that's resurrection of the unjust, right? For they shall be ashamed of the oaks which you have desired, and you shall be confounded for the gardens that you have chosen. For ye shall be as an oak whose leaf fadeth, and as a garden that hath no water. And the strong shall be as tow, and the maker of it as a spark, and they shall both burn together, and none shall quench it. So, they still would be taken into captivity, but then a remnant would return and reestablish Jerusalem. So interspersed throughout this stream of prophecy were the famous passages which would form the basis of Jewish eschatology. And we will open these up after we take a break.